We all know the date, December 7th, 1941. It's a date that just echoes through history, right? I mean, shock, devastation, and the moment a sleeping giant was awoken. But you know, the attack on Pearl Harbor, it wasn't just some random act of violence. It was actually the explosive climax to a story that had been building for almost 100 years. So, let's get into it and unpack the path that led Japan right to America's front door. Okay, so picture this. It's a peaceful Sunday morning in Hawaii. The air is calm, sailors are just, starting their day, and these massive warships of the US Pacific Fleet, they're just resting quietly in the harbor. It's a scene of total, absolute tranquility. But what no one on the ground knew was that death was already on its way.
And then, at exactly 7:55 a.m., that silence is just shattered. With absolutely no warning, more than 350 Japanese aircraft, we're talking bombers, torpedo planes, fighters, they just swarm over the naval base. Nobody saw it coming. The surprise was total. The attack was on.
The human cost is just immediate, and it's staggering. Bombs are raining down, explosions are ripping through the fleet. The USS Arizona is literally torn in half by this massive blast, taking over 1,000 crewmen with it to the bottom. In less than 2 hours, 2,403 Americans are killed. A day of peace had turned into an absolute slaughter.
And this right here, this shows you the strategic devastation. The US Pacific Fleet, which was America's main projection of power in the Pacific, was left in ruins. We're talking 19 ships, including 8 of the fleet's mighty battleships, either sunk or severely damaged. Over 300 aircraft were just wiped out on the ground. It was a truly crippling blow.
While the smoke was literally still rising over Pearl Harbor, the entire world started asking the exact same question. How in the world could this have happened? And maybe more importantly, why?
I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a complete suicide mission, right? A desperate, almost insane gamble. But to really get the answer, we have to rewind the clock and take a look at the forces that were pushing Japan down this path of radical aggression.
You see, for centuries, Japan was basically a total mystery to the Western world. It was the nation that had intentionally sealed itself off, fiercely protective of its own culture and its own sovereignty. They had this policy, it was called Sakoku, and it was designed for one main reason: to keep the influence of European colonial powers out. So while Europe was running around carving up the rest of the globe, Japan stayed a closed society, just watching and waiting.
But in 1853, that isolation was no longer an option. The United States, led by Commodore Perry, sailed right into Tokyo Bay with a fleet of modern warships. The message was simple, and it was brutal. You either trade with us or we will make you. Faced with obviously superior firepower, Japan had no choice. They had to give in. In that moment of humiliation, it sparked a revolution. And what happened next was just a breathtakingly fast transformation. The Meiji Restoration wasn't just about building factories, it was a frantic, top-down revolution to avoid being colonized. Samurai were replaced with a modern army, kimonos with Western suits. They built a military-industrial complex basically from scratch. Japan decided if you can't beat the West, join them. And they did. They defeated China, and then they absolutely stunned the world by defeating the massive Russian Empire. By invading Manchuria in 1931, Japan was making its ambitions crystal clear. It was building its own empire. And when the world condemned Japan's invasion, Japan just walked right out of the League of Nations. Their argument was pretty simple. They said, hey, you European powers built your own empires across Asia using force. Why is it suddenly wrong when we do the exact same thing? They saw themselves not as aggressors, but as liberators of Asia from Western control, with themselves in charge, of course.
So, as Japan's empire got bigger and bigger, it set itself on a direct collision course with the one nation that really had the power to stop it: the United States. Now, the US didn't want to get into a shooting war, so it chose to fight economically instead. As Japan kept pushing its brutal expansion, especially into China, America hit back with tougher and tougher sanctions. They cut off supplies of steel, iron, and copper. But then came the final decisive blow: a full oil embargo.
And this chart right here, this shows you exactly how vulnerable Japan was. A staggering 80% of its oil came from the United States. Without American oil, Japan's industries would grind to a halt. Its tanks, its ships, its planes, the entire war machine would just run dry. The embargo wasn't just a sanction, it was an economic death sentence. So, this is the crucial point. Japan was completely backed into a corner. Its leaders saw only two ways out. Option A, Give in to America's demands, pull out of China, and just abandon their whole imperial dream. That meant total national humiliation. Or there was option B, a desperate, high-stakes gamble. Launch a surprise attack to knock out the U.S. Navy and then quickly seize all the oil-rich territories of Southeast Asia before America could even recover.
Faced with what they saw as national humiliation versus national survival, while the choice in the minds of Japan's military leaders was clear. They chose option B. They chose war. Their target was Pearl Harbor, and their hope was that one devastating blow would just shatter American morale. They miscalculated, badly. The very next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress. In his words, they didn't speak of fear, they spoke of resolve. In that one moment, a nation in shock became a nation driven by a thirst for revenge. The attack didn't break America's will, it forged it into a weapon.
And just like that, the world was on fire. The attack on Pearl Harbor set off a global chain reaction. America declares war on Japan. Then Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, they declare war on America. And in a matter of days, the separate conflicts that were raging in Europe and Asia all fused into one single catastrophic world war.
The gamble that Japan had taken to secure its empire had, in a great twist of irony, actually sealed its doom. Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, at the Battle of Midway, the U.S. Navy was ready. They had cracked the Japanese codes and laid a brilliant trap. American dive bombers ambushed the Japanese fleet, and in a matter of hours, 4 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers were just burning wrecks. Midway was the turning point. The tide of the Pacific War had shifted, and it was never going to shift back. The war that began for America at Pearl Harbor would continue for nearly 4 more years of just brutal, bloody fighting all across the Pacific. And it would end in August 1945, not with ships and planes, but with 2 flashes of unprecedented, terrifying power. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan's unconditional surrender, finally ending World War II and violently kicking open the door to the nuclear age. So in the end, the attack on Pearl Harbor was never just a beginning. It was the end result of a nation's ambition, its angry response to what it saw as hypocrisy, and really a desperate act against what it saw as its own economic strangulation. But in trying to secure its future, Japan unleashed a force of revenge that not only destroyed its empire, but ended with a cost that humanity would never, ever forget.